Sometimes in mixed martial arts, despite a long and storied career, a single fight can come to define a fighter. It's not that they're known for just one thing, we already did a list like that. No, the fighters on today's list are well known, had by any measure success, and especially for the fight game, long careers, but still it was a single moment, high or low, that would come to define them in the eyes of most fans. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, a huge thank you to the biggest channel supporters in our Hall of Famers, and these are 10 fights that defined fighters' careers for better or worse. Number 10. Chris Weidman versus Anderson Silva. There's a few oh my god upset wins that defined fighters that will later appear on this list, but there were none as insane as Weidman's, and I'll tell you why. Rockhold's legacy has shifted a lot since losing to Bisping. Rousey's legacy after Holm and then Nunes, right or wrong, has been diminished a ton in the eyes of a lot of fans, and GSP wasn't quite the GOAT yet when he lost to Sarah. But Anderson, he was the king. He was the greatest in the world at his peak. Sure, the decline was coming, but we didn't know that. When Chris Weidman walked out to I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty draped in the American flag, I thought he was just another dead man walking. I was super duper wrong. One of the all-time great title fight finishes. I still cannot believe it to this day. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. Weidman, of course, defended the title 3 times. He has had a very good career and is a respectable middleweight champion. But this is an awesome thing to be defined by because there's few moments in this sport that were greater than the night Chris Weidman knocked out Anderson Silva and flipped the MMA world on its head. Number 9. Rory McDonald versus Robbie Lawler. There were a lot of things that Rory McDonald was supposed to be. He was the future of MMA because he was a fighter who did not come from any other disciplines, but was trained specifically to be a mixed martial arts fighter. The new generation. He was to be the heir apparent to George St. Pierre's crown, meant to carry on his legacy at welterweight and as a hero to Canada. And while McDonald did not end up becoming those things, he did carve his own legacy, one soaked in crimson, because of all the expectations and perceived shortcomings that came along with them, for all that he was able to do after he left the UFC, like become a Bellator champion. The one fight that will always define Rory McDonald and leave him as someone of note in the history of this sport is his title challenge against Robbie Lawler. To many, it is the greatest fight of all time. I mean, what more could someone do for their legacy than be in the best fight ever?
Cocaine.
But more so than that, McDonald's propensity for violence and ability to endure it until he couldn't any longer is really what makes that fight what it is. And while it certainly defines him in a positive way regardless of the outcome, it's also one of the greatest reminders of the toll this sport can take and the sacrifices required for being great.
I will eat your heart, feast on your family, and then I will go to Disneyland.
Number 8. Alexander Gustafsson versus John Jones. The Mauler has been a mainstay of the European MMA scene since the mid-2000s and amassed 18 bouts in the UFC with 3 separate title challenges over the course of that time. All that on top of being a hero in your home country and helping to build the sport there leaves Gus with a very respectable career even without ever having captured that coveted gold. But what will always define Alex is without question the night he proved that John Jones is human after all. In the cage, I mean. It was kind of apparent that he was outside of it. But anyway, his title challenge against Bones stands as the one fight everyone still points to that John was in real trouble. He may have arguably lost a few of his late defenses on the cards, but nobody ever beat up Jones like Gus did. Nobody had ever taken him down, given him a true test. There was serious trouble there, and in the end, John's brilliance in the cage and ability to adjust in a bad situation shined through to earn him the victory, but it was such an impressive and unexpected turn that most of us thought Gus won on the night. And for all of history, that epic Hall of Fame fight will be what Alexander the Great is most known for, and rightly so. Number 7. Stefan versus Forrest Griffin. I'm not quite sure there's a single fight that better encapsulates a person quite like Stefan Bonner's bout does in the tough finale with Forrest Griffin. It was, of course, a massive and important moment for the sport itself, with it driving the boom period the UFC would see following the Hall of Fame bout. But for Bonner, it was like a microcosm of who he was as a person and a fighter. Knockdown, drag out, blood and guts, never the most skilled, not the biggest and strongest, but as the kids say, he had that dog in him. And is there a better example of showing that than what he did on that night? Griffin did too, of course, but Bonner got the worst of it, and Forrest would go on to win the title to become this ultra-popular figure. But for Bonner, everything started and ended right there in that tough cage. He would never see a title fight. Biggest career win would come shortly thereafter when he beat Keith Jardine. His final career record of 15-9 was nothing to write home about, but he was beloved because because of that one fight, what he gave in that bout, and the fact that he showed all the traits that made that fight so special, win or lose, for the rest of his career.
From bell to bell with me, they're going to get pure chaos. And, that's just how I do it.
Number 6, Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. We did say for better or worse at the beginning of this video, and yeah, unfortunately, and I think very unfairly, Eddie Alvarez is always going to be known for that loss to Conor McGregor, in large part because it was one of the most high-profile moments in the history of the entire sport. I mean, we're talking about the crowning achievement of the biggest star MMA has ever had, and not only that, but he beat Alvarez in God mode, the hands behind the back pretty much encapsulating the entire fight. It's hard to overcome that, which I think really is a shame because Eddie's status as the underground king was really awesome. His run in Bellator and his wars with Chandler are epic. He had one of the best fights I've ever seen outside the UFC against Joachim Hansen in Dream. The guy deserves way more credit for all that he accomplished in the sport, especially on a path outside of the UFC in an era after Pride's death where carving your own way was not easy. But high reward, high risk. He got to the top of the sport, and at the peak of his notoriety, in one of the biggest fights ever in terms of visibility, he would have a bad night at the office, and well, that's probably everyone's lasting memory. Not that I think it bothers Eddie, which is a testament to how badass the guy really is. Number 5, Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey. Headshot dead. God, that will never get old. What a cool thing to say about knocking somebody out. Anyway, Holly Holm is unquestionably one of the most successful women's fighters in MMA history. It's not up for debate. While her title reign didn't last long, she's been in the UFC for nearly a decade now, headlined 8 different cards, had 4 title challenges total, and that's not to mention her kickboxing career. A massive success. One of the most visible fighters on the roster. And of course, all of that comes down to that magical moment, the head kick, the night she dethroned Ronda Rousey. It will always be her legacy. She could still very well win another world title. That is a very real possibility. But even so, there's a very strong chance that even with what is left of her career, if she reaches great heights, none will compare to when she knocked Rousey off the top of the whole sport. I have said this before, but the president and Lady Gaga commented on the win. It was a pop culture moment, and if they needed to make Holly's Wikipedia page one sentence, you better believe most of it is going to be about that win. Number 4, Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold. It is incredible how much this one moment would come to define Michael Bisping, but define is probably not the right word. I think validate would much more make sense in this instance, because on June 3rd, 2016, the story of the Count's career was that he was a good, solid fighter, a tough winner, a huge influence on the UK scene, a talented vet who had settled into a role as a gatekeeper of sorts in the division. And how true that label was is up for debate, but he absolutely shattered that notion by KOing Luke Rockhold and having his 2-year title run. It was the validation that he was always elite and top tier and champion material, but it just hadn't come together for him yet, not until that left hook. Now, Mike has gone on to become one of the staple commentators for the UFC, and while that too will become a part of his legacy, nothing will ever top that moment, and if you had to choose just one thing that is Michael Bisping as a fighter, you would absolutely unequivocally pick that win over Luke Rockhold.
Conceive, believe, achieve. Shut the fuck up.
Number 3, Matt Serra versus George St. Pierre. Matt Serra is a lot of things.
You're an orc. Fuck yeah.
He's a well-respected longtime coach of multiple champions. He's that guy that got spinning back fist KO'd by Shoney Carter. He's the host of the UFC Unfiltered podcast. He's the guy that held that drunk dude down at a restaurant the night before he entered the Hall of Fame. Matt Serra is all of these things. But if you were to distill him down to a single sentence, that sentence would be that Matt Serra pulled off the greatest upset in MMA history. At least in the eyes of many. I know there are some others that we can debate that were pretty close. I mean, I just mentioned how Anderson I thought was even bigger earlier, but I think a big part of what makes Matt's win so great, other than that he beat GSP, the arguable GOAT, is the story that came along with it. A fighter down on his luck, he got a chance on a redemption season of Tough, ended up in a fight nobody expected him to win, and he did it. Truly a real-life Rocky movie, even though he would lose the rematch handedly and never see gold again, and even if GSP beat him 98 times out of 100, on that one night in 2007, Matt Serra did the unthinkable and became an instant legend. You can never take it away away from him. How can you not love this sport when it generates moments like that? Number 2, Burrell versus TJ Dillashaw. I have never seen a fighter who was more successful be defined by a single opponent defeating them quite like Burrell. He wasn't just beaten, he didn't just lose the title. To steal a line from the bloodline, TJ Dillashaw removed Burrell from the island of relevancy. Irrelevant. I mean, the guy goes unbeaten for nearly a decade. Some serious Fedor shit. 5 straight in the WEC and UFC before winning the interim title, which was the real title with Cruz being gone, defends it 3 separate times. 32 wins up to that point before he fought TJ. By any measure, this man should be considered one of the great bantamweights ever, but the losses to Dillashaw, who we didn't yet know was an all-timer himself, absolutely crushed his career. Now yes, he fell off the proverbial cliff after that, and that does play a factor in it. But what people will always remember about him is his downfall at the hands of Snake Boy. It is nearly the strongest case on this list for a fight almost entirely defining someone's legacy, but of course there is number 1, Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva. You know, at first I thought that maybe this was being unfair to Chael to say that his entire career is defined by this one fight. After all, the man is massively influential on the sport. He has seen many heights, he has had a long and storied career in and out of the cage. But then I started thinking about it more, and I don't really see this one fight defining him as a negative or unfair thing. In fact, to me, his legacy is everything that this fight represents. The talk which built this fight up, that changed how people promote themselves in MMA.
Anderson Silva, you are not qualified to make Frank Mir a sandwich.
This was really when Chael became the American gangster.
That guy wouldn't make it 15 minutes in the mean streets of Westland, Oregon, where I grew up.
The incredible performance in the cage, the smothering wrestling. The man absolutely beat the brakes off Anderson Silva for nearly 25 full minutes. The heartbreaking finish, so very close to a world title, but just out of reach as it would remain forever, and the loss via triangle no less, his career Achilles. Then of course there was the aftermath, the scandal, the suspension for his T levels, the fact that in the end this whole fight wouldn't have counted for anything had he won. All of this then led to a massive return bout eventually, and even more hype, all built by Sonnen's performance, his talk, the scandal, all of it. There is no single fight that serves as a better microcosm for a career than that of Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva. It has everything that made Chael special and everything that made him controversial. The highs and lows of his entire career, all there in that one fight. There was just no way we couldn't put him at number 1. It was just too perfect. You know who else is perfect? The editor of this video, Luke Taylor. Please go follow them on their socials. If you could send them gifs of adorable kittens, I'm sure they'd love it. A big ol' shout out to Ben Rosette as well for the awesome tunes, and of course the biggest of thank yous to our channel champions. If you love On Point and want even more exclusive content or want to have a voice in the creation process for our videos, consider becoming a member by clicking the join button below the video. If not, no biggie, but liking and subscribing would also be pretty awesome. What fighter did we not mention that was defined by a single fight? Please let me know down in the comments. I always love reading them. And thanks for watching, guys. Don't say goodbye, say good journey.